party, if you're in a foxhole with somebody, do you think you're going to ask them what their party affiliation is? Wait a second. Are you a Republican or Democrat? Because I really got to know before I stand up and protect your ass. No, of course not. You're an American. You know, that's what we are. You know, somebody once said, we're not enemy. You know, my enemy isn't my enemy. My enemy is my neighbor. You know, I may disagree with my neighbor. In fact, I love my neighbor to death, but we are diametrically opposed politically. But guess what? I still will make him a burger on my grill. I still pat him on the back. I still give him shit. You know, we can live together. There's no reason we can't live together. Only about 6 or so they weren't able to identify. I think he's going to say that now.
That a very small number in the Oregon location were destroyed, and maybe more, maybe a couple hundred in the Washington location. Obviously, those voters know whether they dropped them off at that particular date, and there'll be some outreach on that. And voters should know that there's going to be a way to get a duplicate ballot. Fortunately, we're still 7 days out. They can get a second ballot. There's a way to give them a second ballot and ensure
guess what happens when you do this? It gets reported, and under 52 U.S. Code 20702, which provides criminal penalties for any person who willfully steals, destroys, conceals, mutilates, or otherwise alters paper or record covered by the statute. In other words, you destroy it, there's a federal criminal statute that you could be subject to. And guess what? And in this day and age, we have cameras everywhere, and so who knows if they're going to be able to track this guy down. Hopefully they will. It's important to, when you get to the poll, that you feel safe, that your vote is counted.
But I also want to be clear. Anybody who thinks it's time to play militia, F around and find out.
F around and find out. I love that. Don't you love the tough talk here?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. Today's a big day in our country. It's Election Day. We have breaking news. Not really breaking news, but anyway, I am here. I am your very own personal board-certified criminal defense lawyer. You know who you are. Here at your ready, along with our content genius that you know is Michael Rivers, the man behind the plan, the man who went to vote today. I voted. I didn't vote today. I voted a couple weeks ago. But it's time to vote. If you haven't voted, by the time you watch this, it's too late. So we've got all kinds of people out there voting. And so what we thought today, we do kind of a lighthearted episode about some voter shenanigans that are going on around the country. So before we get to that, this is brought to you by eforms.com. My vote is for eforms.com because when my grandmother's in her basement and she wants to do whatever she wants to do, you know, she can't get up like she used to. She's sitting on that couch. Her bunions are really getting active and she just can't get out and do what she needed to do. So she asked me to do a lot of things for her. How do I do that? With a power of attorney, of course. And what do I do that with? I do that with eforms.com. eforms.com, whether you need a bill of sale, rental agreement, any kind of legal form, you go to eforms.com. And what happens? Well, you're protected in and out of court, and you also avoid the high cost of a lawyer. So eforms.com, a very effective way to win in court or maybe even keep you out of court because the documents don't lie. So go to eforms.com. Very loyal sponsor to CLR. All right, so here's the thing. So we got some statutes about voter fraud, about voter intimidation, about this and that. Today, this is kind of hilarious. Rudy Giuliani pulled up today in his Florida polling station where Donald Trump cast his ballot on Election Day. In the Mercedes-Benz he has been ordered to turn over to a pair of election workers he defamed. So, you know, he declared bankruptcy and whatever. The cash-strapped former New York City mayor who told a bankruptcy court earlier this year that he does not have a driver's license. He sat in the passenger seat of his 1980 SL 500, that's a Mercedes-Benz convertible, two-door, once owned by Lauren Bacall, as reporters and cameras swarmed around him on Tuesday. And here's a picture of him. This is so dumb. Hours earlier, a federal judge in New York City ordered Trump's now disbarred federal lawyer, former attorney, to appear in person for a hearing on Thursday after the election workers who have been trying to collect a $150 million defamation verdict accused him of hiding his property from them. You know, they cleared out his apartment. They're taking his car. Poor Rudy. Poor Rudy. Now, this is why you don't hang out with people like Trump, okay? And I know this is going to be controversial, but he was billing Trump 20 grand a day, and he never saw a dollar of that money. And he went all around the country litigating scores and scores of lawsuits, election fraud lawsuits, and all but one got tossed. And guess what happens when you do that? When you perpetuate a fraud like that, you lose your law license. That's what happened to him. He lost his license to practice law. Giuliani's attorney told the court that he has a scheduling conflict, a contractual obligation to appear on conspiracy theorist Mike Lindell's website, Frank Speech. Do you think a judge is really going to consider that a conflict? I don't think so. The car is on a long list of Giuliani's property, including Manhattan penthouse, 26 watches. How do you have 26 watches? And money he claims he is owed by Trump's campaign because they didn't fucking pay him. The judge ordered him to transfer as part of the judgment from defamation case brought by the two election workers who were subject to a wave of abuse and harassment after Giuliani's false. So they sued him, and they got, I think, $148 million judgment, which is accruing interest. And why didn't he appeal it? I'll tell you why. Because he couldn't afford to. Because you have to put up a bond, and there's no way he could afford that. A jury found Giuliani guilty of defamation last year, and he promptly filed bankruptcy. However, you can't, on intentional torts like that, you can't file bankruptcy. The bankruptcy case was dismissed earlier this year, unfreezing a mountain of litigation against Giuliani. So last month, Giuliani was ordered to prepare a list of property to place into receivership, including his car, his apartment, cash from his checking account, a signed New York Yankees shirt, and other memorabilia, a diamond ring, a television. They're going to take my TV. Holy shit. Various other items and additional property as determined by the court. Here's the thing. You know, this is just awful. You know, I feel bad for Rudy, but he shouldn't have hung his hat on the hat rack that he did. That sounds like an old guy saying, doesn't it? It kind of does. But he went around the country doing these bullshit lawsuits, and they didn't have anything. And they all got tossed out on standing. You know, but even if they had gone forward, they just didn't have the evidence. Not a single one was enough to overturn anything. All right, be that as it may, they're on the lookout for all kinds of things: prohibiting a person of color from lawfully voting, criminal penalties for defrauding the residents of a state of a fair and free election by manipulating the ballot process. You got another statute which provides criminal penalties for officials willfully failing to retain and preserve election records. You got another statute which provides criminal penalties for any person who willfully steals, destroys, conceals, or mutilates or alters paper or other records related to the election. And we're going to get to that last one in a second. So Philadelphia District Attorney gave a press conference today, and this is hilarious. I've never heard anybody talk like this in a press conference.
People to be reassured that when they get up tomorrow to go vote, if they have not voted already, that everybody in this city is working and has been working for months to make sure that there will be nothing tough about that experience and nothing to fear in that experience.
Honestly, the people who are doing this shit, I don't know if they're Trump supporters or not, but these people who are the election workers, they're volunteers. And they're not out to have an agenda. You know, these are volunteers, and they're being harassed and they're being intimidated.
But I also want to be clear. Anybody who thinks it's time to play militia, F around and find out.
F around and find out. I love that. Don't you love the tough talk here?
Anybody who thinks it's time to insult, to deride, to mistreat, to threaten people, F around and find out. We do have the cuffs, we do have the jail cells, we do have the Philly juries, and we have the state prisons. So if you're going to try to turn an election into some form of coercion, if you're going to try to bully people, bully votes or voters, you're going to try to erase votes, you're going to try any of that nonsense, we're not playing. F around and find out. We are in a position where we cannot forget the reality of what occurred on January 6th.
I love that. And that's a nonpartisan message. He's not saying Democrats or Republicans. I mean, but be honest with you, but to be honest with you, here's the thing. In my lifetime, until Trump, I don't ever remember trouble with elections. I don't remember trouble with Walter Mondale conceding the election or Jimmy Carter saying, you know, you won, Reagan. I don't remember George Bush Sr.
Bush Gore. Oh, I was going to say.
No, Bush v. Gore is a perfect example.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was decided by the Supreme Court on a partisan basis, but still, they respected that. We didn't have riots at the Capitol, you know, until January 6th. We just didn't have any of that. And Trump's already setting this up, you know, for any kind of challenge.
We are in a position where we cannot forget the reality of what occurred on January 6th. We cannot forget the reality that there is controversy about elections in the United States. And we cannot forget the reality that it is our job to make sure in a nonpartisan way that every vote is counted. We do not care. I am now wearing my nonpartisan hat. I wear two, but this is my nonpartisan hat. We do not care who gets your vote. We care that you get to vote. That is the most important. That you get to vote.
That is exactly the point. You know, in America, we're democracy. We're Republican democracy. In other words, or we're representative democracy. We don't have true democracy. In other words, true democracy would be you vote on everything. We have representatives that do that for us, and we elect them. And that's a sacred thing that we have here in the United States. It's different than a lot of countries. A lot of countries do have it, but this peaceful transfer of power is something that was unique to our country. We don't have a banana republic. We don't gun down the prior leader and then take it over like a coup. It's important to, when you get to the poll, that you feel safe, that your vote is counted. So let's look at this other other crime that recently occurred that's ongoing, or the investigation is ongoing.
Investigating fire set at two ballot drop boxes, one in Vancouver, Washington, and one in nearby Portland, Oregon, which destroyed hundreds of ballots on Monday. So for more on this, I want to bring in CBS News election law expert and political contributor, David Becker. David, before I talk about the legal repercussions for attacks at voting sites like this, what happens to those votes of those people who voted?
So right now, what election officials are doing is they're trying to identify those ballots. They can often tell there's still information on the ballots that were destroyed. It appears that
So it looks like, I think there were 494 ballots that were destroyed. Of those, 488, the people were identified and contacted. So only about 6 or so they weren't able to identify. I think he's going to say that now.
That a very small number in the Oregon location were destroyed, and maybe more, maybe a couple hundred in the Washington location. Obviously, those voters know whether they dropped them off at that particular date, and there'll be some outreach on that. And voters should know that there's going to be a way to get a duplicate ballot. Fortunately, we're still 7 days out. They can get a second ballot. There's a way to give them a second ballot and ensure
so guess what happens when you do this? It gets reported, and under 52 U.S. Code 20702, which provides criminal penalties for any person who willfully steals, destroys, conceals, mutilates, or otherwise alters paper or record covered by the statute. In other words, you destroy it, there's a federal criminal statute that you could be subject to. And guess what? And in this day and age, we have cameras everywhere, and so who knows if they're going to be able to track this guy down. Hopefully they will.
No one gets to vote two ballots. There's always a check. They only count the first ballot that comes in. There's also ballot tracking in these states. So they'll be tracked as to when the last time anyone saw them, they were delivered or whatever. So they'll know if, for instance, someone's ballot wasn't destroyed and is still coming in, or someone's ballot has been lost.
This whole idea of election fraud, we're so decentralized. You know, I love how, you know, people have opined, oh, it's rigged, you know, there's election fraud all over the place, except when they get the votes. There's nothing wrong with my votes, but all the votes that were cast for the other guy is fraud. It's so ridiculous. I'm probably one of the only lawyers in Minnesota that's represented somebody on a voter fraud case. I had a case several years ago, and my client had pled guilty but had not been sentenced yet. And he filed his ballot, and he was ineligible because it was a felony. And the judge had accepted his guilty plea. So he was technically guilty of a felony, but he hadn't been sentenced yet. So we wound up resolving it, but he really wanted to vote in the election, and he wasn't supposed to. But it doesn't happen that often. It just doesn't. My office partner was one of the few people who ever challenged an election and actually won. No, he lost. Actually, I take that back. It was when Al Franken, who was then a sitting senator, ran against Norm Coleman. And they wound up doing a ballot recount, and Al Franken wound up winning that challenge. It was about 800 votes. And they went and had a trial in front of the Supreme Court of the state of Minnesota. But guess what they didn't do? They didn't riot in the streets. They didn't intimidate anybody. They didn't do anything untoward. They didn't do anything violent. That's not what we're about as a people. You know, one of the best lines I ever heard came from Bob Dole. Bob Dole said, you know, somebody came up to him, don't you just hate Clinton, you know? When Clinton was running against Dole, he says, hate him. He's an American like I am. He's my opponent, not my enemy. You know, guess what you party, if you're in a foxhole with somebody, do you think you're going to ask them what their party affiliation is? Wait a second. Are you a Republican or Democrat? Because I really got to know before I stand up and protect your ass. No, of course not. You're an American. You know, that's what we are. You know, somebody once said, we're not enemy. You know, my enemy isn't my enemy. My enemy is my neighbor. You know, I may disagree with my neighbor. In fact, I love my neighbor to death, but we are diametrically opposed politically. But guess what? I still will make him a burger on my grill. I still pat him on the back. I still give him shit. You know, we can live together. There's no reason we can't live together. So if you are out there with your AK or your AR-15 and you're going to go protect, you know, the few at the ballot, all you're doing is putting fuel to the fire.
One last thing before we do wrap this up, because this is a good amount of time. That stat, I would like you to read that stat. It's on the screen. It's a Cornell link.
Yeah, that's perfect with what I just said.
Yeah.
So under 18 U.S. Code 594, intimidation of voters. Whoever intimidates, threatens, coerces, or attempts to intimidate, threaten, or coerce any other person for the purpose of interfering with the right of such other person to vote or to vote as he may choose, or of causing such other person to vote or not vote for any candidate for the office of president, vice president, president-elector, member of the Senate, member of the House of Representatives, delegate from the District of Columbia, or resident commissioner at any election held solely or in part for the purpose of electing such candidate shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. Very light sentence for intimidating somebody's vote. So that's why I don't have any problem telling Michael who he should vote for and the consequence of voting for the wrong person. I'm kidding, of course. Of course I'm kidding. You know, it's a sacred thing, our vote. You know? So do your civic duty. Vote if you haven't. And respect the vote of others, regardless of party. You know, I may not agree with you, but guess what? We're Americans. You know, grab the hand of somebody and, you know, be friends with people. I mean, look at, what's his name? Mary Madeline and James Carville. You couldn't get two more diametrically opposed politically people, but they've been married for 40 years. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a good spirited debate. There is something wrong with not protecting your brother. So that's all I got for today. Make sure you go to clrbrucerivers.com. You got all kinds of merch. Christmas is around the corner. And make sure you subscribe. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter. Sign up for Patreon. And we'll see you next time on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away.
23-hour lockdown, please, is that my God?